Every day, your lungs inhale 15,000 quarts of air and poison.
Mr. Dickens, I want you just to sit inside this box now. Watch your head getting in.
You're an old man in a box or a child at play. You can't choose not to breathe. You must breathe. 15,000 quarts a day, air and poison.
Okay? And while you're inside, after the door is closed, I'm going to put the clips on your nose again.
You've got to breathe. You breathe sulfur dioxide, which erodes stone.
Lips tight. Do the panting, very small.
Benzopyrene makes cancer. Carbon monoxide impairs the mind. Air pollution stops your breath. They cut a hole in your throat. Death has been gathering in the air of every Canadian city. Poisons continue to accumulate, and you must keep breathing. Good evening, I'm Stanley Burke. For the past 6 months, we've been researching this program, and frankly, it's been a frightening experience. I don't smoke myself, but I now know that I'm getting the equivalent of 2 packs a day right out of the air. I'm inhaling a cupful of dirt, plus poison. I didn't know what emphysema was, and perhaps you don't either, but you will. It's becoming one of the major killers. In fact, lung diseases as a whole are now the #1 killer in Canada, and it's rather frightening to realize that most of our hospitals are in polluted areas. There are doctors who won't operate on dirty days. The density of automobiles in Toronto is 4 times what it is in Los Angeles. I used to think that air pollution was something they had in other countries, but we have it here and now in Canada, and you begin to feel like a fish in a poisoned pond. Toronto is the only city in Canada which really knows what's in the air. Its authorities compare it to Pittsburgh, the North American city most famous for air pollution. Toronto is dirtier. This remarkable Canadian invention, developed by the Behringer Company, may someday measure the atmosphere of Venus from a satellite. Here on Earth, in its first demonstration in Canada, it was aimed at one of the stacks of Toronto's Hearn generating station. It revealed 1,600 parts per million of the invisible gas sulfur dioxide, which in the lungs forms sulfuric acids. More than 250,000 tons of sulfur dioxide go into Toronto's air every year. 700,000 cars contribute 800,000 annual tons of carbon monoxide. In downtown Toronto, pollution is 5 times the recommended safety level. People are beginning to talk.
Now, in Toronto, our law is strictly a smoke abatement law, it's nothing else. It only deals with a small fraction of the pollution problem. We don't have laws at all that can deal with pollution. Let's not kid ourselves, we just don't have them.
I guess I feel that we shouldn't spend money on how we're going to survive in space, and we should worry about how we're going to survive on Earth first.
I'm on bachelor, so I wouldn't know any pollution or air pollution. You don't care? Well, as far as I'm concerned, I don't know no answer.
You just go on breathing, eh?
I just go on breathing. I gotta die anyhow. Apparently, people more or less think it's just a laughing matter, which it isn't. They take it as a joke, like they do many other things.
I think this is going to become the way of the whole city, like Los Angeles. I think a lot of people down there have trouble breathing. I've heard this because of the smog.
Do you know any other people who have suffered similarly to yourself?
Yes, quite a few. Especially when you're in the hospital, you meet all kinds.
You've been in the hospital with your...
Lots and lots of times, more in than out.
If the rate of air pollution in the world continued, we'd be coasting downhill from there on, in terms of life itself.
Well, they'll just die off, and I personally think it'll be a big killer. It'll be very fatal.
The nature of air pollution differs in every area, and the steel-making city of Hamilton has its own brand. The companies have spent millions trying to control it, up to $2 million to clean up a single smokestack. The city has passed laws, there's a citizens committee, some progress has been made, but really only in controlling smoke. There's been almost no success in controlling the far more dangerous gases which are invisible. And so far, no solution is in sight as long as coal is used to smelt steel. Montreal has a pollution problem comparable to some of the most serious in the United States. Sudbury has been called the Hiroshima of Canada because of devastation from smelter fumes. Sydney, Nova Scotia, with its steel mill, has been called the most polluted city in Canada. And all across Canada, pulp mill pollution, as at Port Alberni, BC. Windsor, Ontario, victim of international pollution from Detroit. Sarnia, down in Chemical Valley, pollutes the Americans. And all over the country, the latest models in smog-making machines are the prime source of carbon monoxide, which dulls the mind, and benzopyrene, a cause of cancer. They also emit hydrocarbons and nitrogen oxides, which mix in the sunlight to create new poisons. Exhaust controls are debated in Canada. They are now federal law in the United States, where some authorities fear that life itself may vanish.
Many people look up in the air and they think it just keeps on going indefinitely. They don't know that there is an effective aerial sewer that surrounds the Earth, only 12 to 14 miles thick. There is just that much space and no more in which to dump pollution. At the rate that it is being polluted by this country and the world as a whole, we have until about the year 2000 before the critical point that will truly begin to affect life will be reached. This is why life,
What effect specifically?
ability to go on existing without massive emphysema and all the other physical consequences of air pollution.
Are you saying that at the present rate, life could be wiped out on the planet?
Life would become unbearable.
Well, when you say unbearable, can you be more specific? What does that mean?
Begin to affect the ability to go on existing.
Well, I heard over the radio this morning that some professor was talking of a 14-mile limit or something, and he said by the year 2000 that we would be in very serious trouble.
And what is your feeling about all this air pollution that's coming across from
Well, I
Windsor
think
from
it's
Detroit?
disgraceful. I think something could be done about it and should be done about it.
You take a lot of days of the week when the wind's blowing over here and them factories are going, it's just pure orange skies, and it's a stink and a smell and everything. Well, it isn't coming from Canada.
On the other side of the undefended border, across the Ambassador Bridge, is the source of Windsor's problem, Detroit, and more specifically, the steelmaking center on Zug Island. Air pollution is no respecter of boundaries, and the city fathers of Windsor, unlike those of most Canadian centers, openly admit that the city's air is poisoned.
We've had for a long time now sampling machines placed in strategic points around the city, but basically we always keep one down on the roof of City Hall, which is what we call a high-volume sampler. And these sampling machines are actually like vacuums that suck air through a filtered paper, which is analyzed. But rather funny, the pollution was so much that the motor completely clogged up and it failed to function. I think gave every physical indication, if not a very practical one, that Windsor was being highly polluted.
Our city, in cooperation with the federal and provincial government, have had a survey And we have all the evidence to show that this is a bad situation. In fact, the report was marked confidential, and we even couldn't give it to the press. It was so serious. So just last year, I appeared before the International Joint Commission in Ottawa, and they had a new proposal to have another survey of Windsor and Sarnia, which is also a bad spot. And I protested this because I felt that we had all the evidence. We didn't need any more surveys. We wanted some action.
But Detroit is cleaning up Zug Island with one of the most advanced control programs in the U.S. We asked company representatives why they waited for legal action to compel controls.
Well, I don't think you can specifically put this in the context of taking action following legal action. We were discussing and working on this problem quite a few years prior to this. We've put in facilities already, a large number of facilities to control air pollution. The problem didn't come about overnight, and I don't think we can expect it to disappear that quickly either.
We recently did a major announcement of a major industrial complex spending $10 million, which is in itself seems like a significant sum of money. But when you relate this to the fact that the company is capitalized at $1,300 million and perhaps made $50 million net profit in 1 year, a $10 million investment by any stretch of the imagination is an insignificant contribution and an insignificant burden. I actually view the burden concept as a myth being generated by industrial management. And it's the myth generated, frankly, to scare politicians away from the need of developing and insisting that local air pollution regulations be adopted and effectively enforced.
New York is the dirtiest city in North America, and here industries long opposed a cleanup. Now they're faced with the most highly organized citizens committee in the world. But are the citizens right? Can a modern city afford clean air? We asked Mrs. Hazel Henderson.
Well, this is something that we try so hard to tell people, and people don't generally understand, and that is that clean air is much, much cheaper than dirty air. It's the dirty air which is costing us the money. And in New York City, a recent study by an economist showed that air pollution costs the average family of four in New York City $700 or $800 per year per family. And that to buy clean air, which would mean slightly higher taxes, slightly higher prices on one or two things, would cost that same family about 1/6 of that. So they would end up with beautiful clean air to breathe and a lot of change in their pocket.
Well, you have a citizens movement going here, which has enormous momentum. How did you go about it, and what's your advice to people in other cities?
Well, I think the most important thing is to realize is that nothing really will be done until the citizens begin to get involved and begin to let everybody know that they do care about having clean air to breathe and for their children to breathe. And we began 2 years ago in New York City with 5 people and a war chest of about $5. And we now have 24,000 members in the New York metropolitan area, most of whom are young parents, like myself, who really are worried about the long-term effect of pollution on our children.
How worried? What sort of things are you worried about?
Well, we're worried that nobody's really had a chance to study what the long-term effects of all of these gases and poisons in the air will do to children. Carbon monoxide, we understand from a recent study that was reported in the New York Times, can actually affect children's school performance. If they've driven to school in a car, it makes them less active and less able to do their lessons. And of course, there's just the sheer health.
But in practical terms, you really haven't accomplished very much, have you? I mean, here we are up here on a clear, sunny day, and you can't even see out to the outskirts of the town.
Well, let me just say that this is a clear day for New York, and many days you might have come up here, and normally you wouldn't be able to see to the river and you might look down and not be able to see the streets for the pollution. So this is one of our clear days. But the thing is that what has been accomplished here is that in the 2 years that we have been active with our advertising campaign, we have made air pollution a household word in New York City. And this has led to a law which was passed a year ago, which was the strongest law which any city council in the United States has passed. And that law passed because the air pollution was on everybody's lips. Nobody dare be against clean air.
Meanwhile, in Montreal, because of the transit strike which choked streets with extra cars, air pollution reached critical levels. Even normally, according to a leading American authority, Montreal's pollution is comparable to that of Chicago, which is second in degree only to New York. Effective control has so far proven impossible because the industrial area of Greater Montreal is made up of 32 uncoordinated municipalities. Industry is centered in the city's east end. And here, to control pollution, 18 companies have formed the Laval Industrial Association. The association firmly believes that industry can measure and control its own problem without government interference. We asked Dr. L.P. Roy if this is good enough.
Do you think that Quebec should have a more stringent air pollution law than it now has?
Well, we'd like ourselves to act in such a way that we wouldn't need any regulation or any stringent regulation, because we think that we can do a proper job ourselves without being forced to do so.
You represent 18 companies in this big industrial area. What about the ones that don't belong to your association and are polluting the air? What do you do about them?
Well, we are mainly restricted our activities toward this east end area, and I think we have all of, if not most of all the large companies and most of the small ones.
But all you need is one that's putting out a lot of pollution, and he can really make a difficult situation here.
Yes, but there's nothing we can do about it. We don't have any forcing action to ask some plant to join if they don't.
It's all voluntary.
It is, yes. So
we have had good cooperation from a large part, 75 to 80% of these industries. But you need legislation to force some of them to abide to our requirements. Otherwise, they would do nothing about it.
Well, now, how can you be sure in your organization that if you find a serious pollution problem coming out of a plant around here, that the thing is going to be corrected?
The only thing we can do is make recommendations. It's up to the management to decide to do it themselves. This is a completely voluntary action, and by voluntary action, and there's no enforcement whatsoever. And
supposing the plant says, well, it's going to cost too much money, we simply can't afford to do it.
Well, it's up to them.
Well, I think voluntary air pollution control is a Victorian concept that has been discredited everywhere in the industrial world. This is a public problem. This can only be handled by the public representatives. Voluntary control, when you really get to the root of it, is a way of saying we'll clean up when we wish and where we wish and if we wish. I don't think this is acceptable. In 1967 is rather insulting to the public.
Tell me, what kind of legislation would they not be in favor of?
Well, I think legislation that would demand that they'd appropriate dollars to their budget that their particular operation could not stand, but that enforcing this expense onto the public in terms of consumer price of the goods they're manufacturing.
And this undoubtedly would cause undue and unnecessary additional financial burdens.
Well, and what kind of a burden to industry? How would this affect the industry in this area?
Well, you better hold this. This is where we're going to get into a problem. I can't answer this question. This is just not possible to say.
Well, I was just going to ask you what you meant by burden.
Well, let's put it this way. If you import Sarnia's legislation to Montreal, if the conditions are much more serious in Sarnia, quite obviously the financial implication would be far greater. If you import Ontario's legislation, for example, which perhaps is more akin to the Montreal situation, it would not be so acute.
Basically, I think the problem is that there is no link between the public need and the legislative action that is needed to get things going. Normally, you would expect that your elected representatives were the people that you could turn to, your local representatives. It's a matter, unfortunately, a fact that our local representatives have absolutely nothing to say in this matter. Our members of Parliament, either to the provincial House or to the federal House, have no authority to introduce legislation. They can't introduce a bill that will ever get heard. So consequently, the public is left without a spokesman.
Do you think the people who are behind this organizational roadblock are going to continue to get away with this?
I'm afraid that, putting it that way, that I'll have to say yes. I find it rather humiliating as a Canadian in 1967 to say that a determined group of people who want to block public action on this can do it.
Now, why do you feel it's so important to control air pollution in a big city like Montreal? What will happen if we don't?
Well, we will get sick and we will die.
Pollution in Canada to many means Sarnia and Chemical Valley. In Sarnia itself, pollution means controversy.
During the past few months, Mr. Blundy, Sarnia's had a lot of bad publicity about air pollution. Why do you think this is?
Well, I personally think that a good deal of the bad publicity that has come from the personal aspirations of certain small politicians. Anybody who comes here to Sarnia and talks to responsible people in industry or responsible people here at City Hall, they get what I think are forthright answers. We're not trying to hide anything. We know we have pollution. All we want is to be treated fairly. And people come here and interview us, and we spend some time talking to them in a forthright manner and on common sense basis, and we're quoted in some facetious manner that makes us all look like a bunch of jackasses. Now, we have certain pollutants in the air in Sarnia that may be, they may make certain chest conditions a little worse than in other areas. But as far as them being harmful or injurious to health, to a normal person, our medical officer of health says they are not.
Well, I believe that my family's health hasn't been as good since we moved into the city from the country a little over 3 years ago. I suffer myself from catarrh, which I was practically free from, and my children have developed earaches and bronchitis, as I believe directly attributable to air pollution.
Now, we get certain inoculations that keep our problems under control, and I feel that my condition is not even chronic. But I see those little kids coming in there, wheezing, coughing, spitting into handkerchiefs, talking about blocked ears, all of the symptoms of bronchitis, emphysema, asthma, bronchiectasis.
I believe the type of pollution we have in Sarnia, and perhaps everywhere, creates a great many respiratory problems, and I have a great deal of medical evidence to support me in this. Of course, we only have one allergist in Sarnia. He has been quite forthright, but has been, to some extent, reprimanded by the other doctors, unfairly, I think. But I believe the other doctors are coming around to the view that perhaps they should take and have a responsibility to take more forthright steps, as has been said in certain publications. One notably, an American Medical Association publication, put a responsibility on the doctors to step into this problem and speak out forthrightly on it. So far, I'm afraid, only 2 doctors that I know of in Sarnia have done so. One said he was leaving Sarnia because of his family suffering from respiratory diseases due to pollution.
And in fact, I believe he did leave.
Yes, he did.
And he's now in Guelph.
I believe he's in Guelph, Dr. John Woodcare. He was quite a capable doctor. And unfortunately, Sarnia got national publicity on this thing, which I consider unnecessary. As I think that if we were forthrightly in the open, in front of the public, admitting our faults, and at the same time taking steps to alleviate the problem, our publicity would all be good.
Mrs. Carsley, tell me about air pollution in Sarnia.
It's pretty bad around here.
How does it affect you?
It affects me because I'm an asthmatic.
And in what way do you feel it?
Well, when you have an asthma attack and can't breathe.
And you feel that air pollution is the cause of this?
Well, not all the cause, but it has a lot to do with it.
And is it worse sometimes than others?
Yes.
Why do you think it's so difficult to clean it up here in the city?
I don't know. A lot of people don't want it cleaned up because they're too involved with the plant.
Why should that make a difference?
Well, it's their life staff around here. They don't like to talk against it.
Do you think that might... Why would that cause them any difficulty, do you think?
They could lose the job.
Most of the air pollution comes from the Chemical Valley. Where? In Sarnia. I don't feel that I'm really technically astute enough to point out given plants, but I think that the evidence is rather strong.
Has there been any effort made between the governments of your two cities to clear up this problem?
Well, really very little. There was a contact made approximately 2 years ago, and nothing really came of it. And I really believe that in the case of both Port Huron and Sarnia, that both cities feel that the problem is so large and of such a technical nature that it's really beyond our means to cope with it effectively.
In Sarnia, international polluting is reversed. Across the river and across the border, citizens of Port Huron call themselves the all-American city with the all-Canadian smell. As in Montreal, Sarnia's pollution is supervised by a voluntary group of industries, the Lambton Industrial Association. Their measurements are the only source of information on Sarnia's air, something that disturbs union spokesmen.
You can't really expect a robber to police himself. And these people who are doing the testing are the prime representatives of those who make the pollution. And so therefore, they are going to gather all of the data, but they're only going to release the data which they wish to release. And this is the answer that we'll get is from the data that is released, not the entire thing.
This can be a vicious cycle and go on until the city fathers, government, begin to realize that they have a responsibility to this community. Until people who are owned by industry and who sit on city commissions for $200, $300, $400, $500 a year will be brave enough and men enough to stand up and speak objectively about what is affecting the common welfare of this community, their health.
We questioned members of the Voluntary Control Association on the effectiveness of their pollution control.
How does your level compare with that in other industrial centers?
Level of what?
Air pollution.
Well, again, pollution being a general word, level is a general word. If you have several impurities, you have to define each one. We measure a group of impurities in Sarnia. In general, we consider that we are well within the standards set anywhere in the world, anywhere in North America. I think that's the answer.
So is there any impurity in the air in Sarnia, any level of impurity which is above the recommended safety levels?
Safety levels are moving all the time, but as far as we know, there are none.
Well, your industry here is making, in Chemical Valley, a profit of how much? Tens of millions of dollars a year. Are you living up to your social responsibilities in spending $100,000 a year plus a certain amount of additional expenditure by private companies?
First of all, our industries are not making tens of millions of dollars a year. This is simply not correct. Second, we spend up to $100,000. We will be spending $100,000 this year in particular for the measurement alone, not necessarily for any corrective measures which are the responsibility of the individual companies. The expenses that they undertake will show up on their balance sheets, not on ours.
It has been suggested that if the present trend continues in world air pollution, that life itself may be threatened by, say, the year 2000. Is your industry thinking in those terms?
We think in those terms, but we're not capable of doing anything about it. In this, we await medical opinion and medical guidance as to where we should go. If that statement is in fact correct, and it may well be, when somebody comes along and pins it down to what should we do, I think that we will be there.
We'll know that where you have a high concentration of an oil petrochemical industry, there's a very definite potential for air pollution.
What about Port Huron? The mayor told us yesterday that Port Huron suffers acutely from pollution coming across to them from Sarnia.
Well, without arguing with a good mayor, we do have a concentration of industry entirely different than they have, and I presume if he smells something or the citizens smell something, they will look to Sarnia. This becomes a natural...
Well, do you think it's coming from Sarnia?
I don't know. I wouldn't know.
When you say, is there an air pollution problem? Yes, of course there is. Because if nobody did anything about it, nobody made any attempt to control it, we could be in a very bad way. But if you mean, is there an air pollution problem here now? In other words, are we suffering from the results of air pollution in Sarnia? My answer then would be no, we're not.
Now, what do you mean when you say we? Who's not suffering?
We the people.
Okay, now take a deep breath in as much as you can. Blow all of it out. Keep pushing till it's all out.
We the people.
Now, take a deep
What is
breath in.
air pollution to we the people? It can be asthma, bronchitis, heart failure, lung cancer, emphysema.
Okay, very good.
Yet much to be learned about the effects of air pollution, according to an internationally recognized authority, Dr. Stephen Ayres of New York.
You have said that air pollution results in a great many side effects, that it interacts with other diseases and problems.
Yes, we feel that as pollutants are taken into the lung, that they cause first an irritation of the lung and produce a bronchitis and then emphysema, which is a more chronic illness of the pulmonary system. There's also good evidence they may cause cancer of the lung. And who knows what happens when they're swallowed. They may produce stomach malignancies. They're then carried to various parts of the body and may cause all sorts of untold mischief in these areas.
What about your own reactions as a father and as a citizen?
Well, of course, this really bears on why I've gotten interested in air pollution. In dealing with people with serious lung disease, it becomes obvious very early in the game that you can't escape the effects of air pollution. Now, people with emphysema are constantly involved with this. And if they live in New York City and are exposed to high levels of pollution for several days, they become dramatically ill. They become more short of breath. They begin to cough. They may develop pneumonia. They may even go into a coma. And this worsening of symptoms we can trace directly to the effects of air pollution. There's no question that in terms of human suffering, and not death, just suffering, air pollution really makes the life of a patient with lung disease not very happy. And I might say that it's quite frustrating to a physician, because when a patient says, "What should I do?" You're quite at a loss. He can't really leave the city. Most of these people are not of sufficient financial backing that they can leave the city. About all you can say is go home, close the windows, and sit on the edge of your bed and pray.
But air pollution isn't just a big city problem. A new phosphate plant back in 1960 brought a welcome boost to the economy of the quiet agricultural area around Dunnville in southern Ontario. New paychecks, new life, where since pioneer days generations had dwelt in the security and peace of rural living. Pandora's box was opened. For generations, good cash crops had burgeoned from some of the richest farming land in the country. Pandora's box was open. The farmers noticed at first the thing that came out of the box. They don't like to talk about it even now. You have to persuade them to tell you what it was that came out of the box. Something mysterious burned the peppers, burned the fruit, dwarfed and shriveled the grains, damaged everything that grew. Something in the air destroyed the crops. Anyone could see it, you can see it now. Just go for a walk with one of the farmers, Tony Carl. Let him show you his cucumber leaves. Something came out of the box, something in the air. It burns. Look at those holes. They noticed it first in 1961, again in 62, worse each year. Plants that didn't burn were dwarfed, grain yields cut in half. To show you his fruit trees. The 20-year-old orchard, trees that produced so richly for so many years, and now for 6 years they've given up no fruit at all for market. Random apples, not worth picking. Finally, a greater disaster revealed the source of the trouble. A plume from a silver stack, once the symbol of Dunville's progress, spreading for miles around. Poison, fluorine. It was identified by veterinarians. There was no doubt. What happened to the cattle was unmistakable, and it broke the farmers' hearts. Fluorosis. Swollen joints, falling teeth, pain, until cattle lie down and die. Hundreds of them. The cause? Fluorine poison from the air. Under arbitration, the electric reduction company paid the farmers $218,000 for the loss of crops and cattle. Shriveled crops, limping cattle. But now, is there a graver development? I asked Joe Cassina.
And you're walking with a limp right now.
Yes, I had myself examined by Dr. Marsden, and a specialist from Hamilton. Dr. Marsden called me in, and he says to me, he says, you know, Joe, he says, if you've got pollution damage, you're going to have an awful time to prove this. I told Dr. Marsden, listen, Dr. Marsden, if I've got to die from anything, I want to know what the hell I'm dying from. Well, on up, Dr. Marsden says, you know, he says, there is a case like this in the United States. One in Canada, and I think you're the third one. I'm going to look this thing over and find out whether this is really it or isn't it. Well, I said, thank you, Dr. Marsden. I'm glad you're thinking of this in this respect. And then I left his office. But I'm really concerned because I want to know what's the matter with her. If it isn't this, I want to know it. If it is this, I also want to know it.
Well, I can see that she's lame, got deformed hooves. What else is wrong with the symptoms?
Well, the swelling of the knees and of the bottom part, like right down here and at the bottom, and also that affects the teeth. I don't know if she's willing to show it now or not. You could see that they got brown stains on them, and there's sometimes they fall out and they lose their teeth as time goes on, like.
Well, now, you sell this animal to be destroyed. Is the meat eaten?
Yes, the meat has eaten because it's been said that the meat and the milk's okay for human consumption.
You eat this meat yourself?
Yes, we do.
How do you feel yourself?
Matter of fact, not too good.
How do you feel?
Well, to go into detail, I wouldn't want to say. I feel I got achy joints myself, and as well as on the knees, and it's been bothering me right along, and I'm under investigation by the health department right now.
What did they tell you?
So far, there has been no results as of yet.
There are a lot of other symptoms around here. I noticed looking at your trees, for example.
Oh, the trees, that affects your grass and grains and scrubs as well. And, most anything what grows around here is affected by it.
How much is your production down?
It's down about 30% over last year.
How long can you keep on going at this rate?
Maybe next year yet. Maybe not even that long.
Well, now, specifically,
yourself, how are you feeling? What about your family? What about your neighbors?
Well, myself, I'm not feeling like I should feel. I've not felt right since spring. But being a farmer, you lay it on over the wintertime, you take it easy, you think you got a break in the spring, and you feel these little aches and pains as normal. But then when my feet started to swell, I thought it wasn't normal, and I went in and had to look after. And I'm still not right. I still have plenty of nights that I don't get enough sleep due to the fact of pain. And I don't know, the doctors don't seem to know what it is.
Well, what about your own children, for example? Doesn't this bother you?
Personally, it does. Real serious. We can't get it. All we've been told is that for the amount of consumption that a human eats of food that's produced in the area, it represents such a small percentage that you won't get enough to harm you. But we were also told that gardens in the high contaminated areas, there was some products in them that were unfit for human consumption because of the high fluoride content in them.
Such as what?
Lettuce, cabbage, some of these open leaf type of vegetables.
What's wrong with that plant?
Well, first thing is we can't get the proper growth on our plants anymore. See, this is only half the growth here on this plant, where peppers should be 3 feet high this time of the year with a good season we had this year. And look at this here. This is burnt. One side is burnt completely and the other side is partly good. So this is all scrap. But you check this plant, and there's quite a few in here. They're all dwarfed, you know.
They're all dwarfed.
There is nothing healthy on this plant at all here.
What do you think about these crops around here, this corn in the field next door, for example? Should you be growing, in your opinion, should you be growing these crops? Should you be sending them to market? Are they safe?
I wouldn't know. I'm not in position to answer that, you know. What I think sometimes my vegetation shouldn't even go on the market. But I got to make a living out of this, man.
How many people are out of business here now?
Well, there's eight cattlemen that are out of business, for sure. There's Tony Zenemirsky, Peter Crooken, that's Peter Shalastowski, Mr. Vanderbeek, Alco Brothers, John Crothers, Keith Wright, and myself. We all had cattle, and nobody has any now.
What about the company men?
They never tell you it's fluorine. Until 1965, nobody mentioned fluoride. On 65, when the cattle went down, then they started, there was a buildup of fluoride in the cattle, buildup. Then they didn't know whether it was buildup in the vegetables or not, but they said it was buildup in the cattle. The cattle went down. In fact, went down that bad. I've seen cattle laying in the field that couldn't get up. They had to tow them out of the field with tractors. So,
yeah, but there's a dead leaf.
That's right.
Can't you take that into the lab and analyze it and...
Well,
what's in it?
We've sent leaves away, but we never get an answer on it.
What's the company tell you? Do you have meetings with company representatives? What's your relationship with the company?
We just get a mum word whenever we talk to the company at all. We don't get any response to outside of promises that they were going to clean it up. And so this year, why, they've been as quiet as mice.
We went to the Airco plant where employees said the problem is being controlled. There's nothing to get excited about. They weren't prepared to admit that there's any problem. As an employee or as a resident of the area, what are your reactions?
As an employee, I got no comments.
As a resident?
As a resident, personally, I don't think there's any problems, but I don't wish to comment one way or the other. I have my own opinions, but I don't wish to express them.
When we have seen crop damage that we know, I mean, that can be recognized as specific fluorine damage, marks on the leaves. We've seen cattle that are crippled with their teeth
I
falling
can
out.
take you into my front yard and show you trees and so on. I have 4,000 acres down on the other side of Peterborough, and I was down there on the weekend, and there's all kinds of attack down in that area.
But not
and sure as hell not fluorine.
But not cattle with fluorosis. Now, this is a disease
No, I'm
that
not
can be
talking
specifically
cattle.
identified.
Well, could be.
Proved.
All right. I'm not...
Is it coming from here?
Let's put it this way. There is fluorine coming out of our stacks, and we've admitted it. We know there is. But a small amount.
I have in the studio here Dr. Diamond, the Ontario Provincial Minister of Health, and we had hoped to have a representative of the Airco company. The company declined the invitation, however. Dr. Diamond, this is, of course, a local situation, a specific one, but we think it's a very good example of the sort of problems you can get into in air pollution. What are your reactions?
Well, this is, of course, a local problem. Unfortunately, it is not the kind of a problem encountered very often throughout the province. I recognize that this came to light only very recently, that effort has been expended in seeking to control it. But it was rather a staggering revelation to find that something of this kind could be going on, and there was little knowledge about it at the time until the damage was done and investigations were started. We recognize that this is part of the whole problem of controlling people's environment.
Well, now this is a question I would have preferred to put to the company representative, but here's a book on air pollution put out by the World Health Organization in 1962, which goes into this specific phosphate fluorine problem, and it came up prior in other places before this plant was built. But even so, it's been going on now for 7 years. Should it have been allowed to develop? And specifically, what is going to be done about it? The farmers have told us that you have said that if it can be shown that there is damage to human beings, to health, that this plant will be closed down.
No, at no time have I said that the plant will be closed down. Very definitely, if the damage either to human beings, to plant life, or to animal life continues, or if damage to human health is demonstrated, and there is no way of controlling the pollution, of course the plant would have to be shut down, because life is far more important than anything that comes out of any plant. I'm quite certain that some substitute could be found for the product that is manufactured here. But so far, this has not been demonstrated. We know there has been plant damage. We know there has been damage to animal life. We are very much concerned, for instance, about the complaints now that we hear from people about differences in their own health. And this is one of the matters that will be very quickly submitted to extensive and intensive study. But we also know that there are ways of controlling fluoride emissions. The company, I believe, has controlled this at least to 90% of the emission. That 10% is still, in our view, too much to be allowed to flow free in the air. And this, too, will be brought under control, if it is at all possible. If not, then we have to look at other ways of controlling the problem.
Well, Dr. Diamond, just a moment ago, you expressed concern about the health issue at Dunnville. Now, we asked a specialist in fluorosis, Dr. Walbott of Detroit, to go to the area. He saw 9 of the farmers, and he found that 2 seemed to be suffering from fluorine intoxication. And here now is what he had to say to our producer, Larry Gosnell.
This disease is characterized by joint pains, by headaches, by gastric and intestinal disturbances, by bladder disturbances. In the area where I saw these 2 people, I noticed mainly arthritis in various parts of the body, particularly in the lower spine.
What's going to happen to these people who have fluoride poisoning if something isn't done for them?
If they are taken out of their surroundings, this disease, according to what I have learned, will clear up by itself. But if they continue to live in this area, eventually they are going to get more serious harm, serious damage to their joints, to their internal organs, particularly to their kidneys, and also to their brain and to the spine, which eventually will lead to death. As a rule, they die. The immediate cause of death is pneumonia, or it is damage to the kidneys, pyelitis, pyelonephritis.
Well, all right, now, can you tell me your own personal opinion about the responsibility of the officials in this whole question?
Of course, if I would give you my own frank opinion, I feel that the
the government officials who should look into this matter carefully and should particularly be guided by scientists not connected with industry. They have fallen down on their job.
Dr. Walbot, what would be your advice to these people who are suffering from fluoride intoxication?
First of all, they should be hospitalized and more thorough and more conclusive tests be carried out. And furthermore, the thing that has to be done to cure these people is either to eliminate the pollution of the air or to have them leave their farms and move into an unpolluted area.
Can you give me your reaction?
Well, this is very interesting, but neither as Minister of Health nor as a physician would I comment on a very brief report of that kind. First of all, I recognize that Dr. Walbot has done a very great deal of work in the study of fluorosis. He's probably one of the most extensively quoted authorities. He and I believe a colleague are among the most extensively quoted authorities on the continent and maybe in the world on this matter of fluorosis, and doubtless have far more knowledge of it than I would have. But fluoride isn't the only cause of arthritis. Arthritis is one of the most common degenerative diseases to which humanity is subject. And I would be most loath to come to any conclusion, any clinical conclusion on the basis of a report of that kind. I agree with one thing that Dr. Walbot says there, that these people who are complaining of difficulty, painful and aching joints, should be hospitalized or should be subjected to the type of study and investigation which their attending physicians believe is essential to diagnose the problem. Again, I have to emphasize that fluorosis is not the only nor the most common cause of painful and swollen, deformed joints. It might very well be. I don't want to minimize the possibility of this being a factor, nor will I concede that it is a factor, because I don't know. I say to you that now under our Air Pollution Control Act, we have the power and will take the authority to institute intensive and extensive studies to the end that we will try to determine how much human health is damaged by this pollution.
Well, Dr. Diamond, you're just about to put into effect the most advanced air pollution legislation in Canada. But this is obviously more than just a provincial responsibility.
The responsibility of the federal government, I think, is very real. Now, I'm rather surprised to hear suggestions from my colleague, the Minister of National Health and Welfare, that this isn't a great problem. This is a problem of great importance and cannot be emphasized enough. The federal government has to have a responsibility. First of all, air pollution doesn't recognize any geographic boundaries. They very definitely have a responsibility in the matter of trains, of shipping, interprovincial sources, and international sources. They've already tackled the international, or are tackling the international sources. If the federal government isn't going to take responsibility for administering the law as it refers to interprovincial boundaries, then they must delegate that responsibility to us. But I think they've got to set standards. There isn't any use of Ontario saying that we demand this if an industry can cross the border into any other adjoining state and set up. This will work to the irreparable damage of Ontario or any province, because the other province sooner or later will have to introduce control. There isn't any doubt in my mind. So it must set standards. It must give industry the relief by way of either rapid write-off or financial incentive or tax abatement or any one of a host of ways available to help industry tackle this problem in real fashion. They have done this. They've recognized this in the matter of water pollution. Why won't they do it in the matter of air pollution?
Thank you, Dr. Diamond. In Washington, the federal government has taken a firm leadership role in air pollution control, but so far the Canadian government has not. In Ottawa, the federal Minister of Health, Alan McEachen.
I consider that the problem of air pollution in Canada is one of the most important problems that faces our contemporary society.
And specifically, what are you doing and what do you propose doing?
The federal government has not the jurisdiction to deal with the problem of pollution in Canada. The provincial governments, under the Constitution, occupy and have the authority to cope with this problem. We have certain roles to play, and in a sense they are important roles, but they're not at the very heart of the problem.
Do you have any specific plans now for cooperation with provincial and local authorities? Specifically, what do you propose doing about this?
We have at the moment, no specific new proposals to make. We do have at the present time the whole problem of the federal role and the potential coordinating role of the federal government in this particular field. But we do not have fresh plans at the present time for presentation to the provinces.
So, who will control air pollution? The cities? It's been tried, it hasn't worked very well. Among other things, cities compete with one another to try to attract polluting industries. The provinces, of course, but even provinces compete for industry, and it's going on right now. Most authorities agree that it must be a cooperative effort from the federal government right on down, and most agree that it's urgent. We don't even have the detailed statistics in Canada. We don't know what's going on, and we may be right now well on our way toward our first disaster. We've cited some examples in this program, and we could cite others, many others. Out on the prairies, where the skies are not cloudy all day, they have fairly serious pollution problems. Jasper up in the Rockies is polluted. Banff could become polluted. Vancouver could have another Los Angeles situation. And experience elsewhere has shown that air can be cleaned up. I've driven through Germany, the industrial heartland of Europe, and the air is clear. Russia has imposed the highest standards of purity in the world. But in our society, not much happens until the average citizen demands it.
Walked along a highway in Alberta carrying a large cross on his shoulder, and for this he spent 17 days in a mental institution. You'll see that story on The Way It Is, 1 hour from now. This is the CBC Television Network.